Hello everybody! Today we will be talking about this sword from Ronin Katana. This is from their fantasy line, and it is very clearly inspired off of the Lord of the Rings Aragorn Ranger sword from Peter Jackson's trilogy. And I've had this sword for close to a year now. Sadly, I did not do an unboxing. Oh, actually, no, I lied. I do have an unboxing video of this and another sword. I guess I'll put a link down there if you're interested. But yeah, so it's been a little while since I've had it. And so today I want to go over the overall details of the sword. Then we'll take a closer look at the scabbard, take a closer look at the hilt and components, and then the blade. And then I will talk about whether or not I think it is worth your money. Starting off, some of the total details of the sword. It is around 45 inches. Mine is just short of that. And it is 3 pounds, 9 ounces. And that is pretty close to what the website says the specifications are. Good on them for getting that pretty correct. Sometimes a website will say that a sword is a certain weight and then it'll get to you and it'll be a vastly different weight or a slightly different size or something like that. But mine came pretty close to what the website specified. We'll start off taking a look at the scabbard. Nice metal end bit here. I believe this is some sort of stainless steel. Haven't had any issues with rust or corrosion or anything like that in all the time that I've had it. And I think it looks nice. No wiggle or anything like that. Seems like it's secured on there pretty well. Here you can see the stitching. The stitching overall is pretty straight. However, I will note that the stitching both on the scabbard and on the hilt is fairly large, and so it is very noticeable and pronounced when you feel it. There is some nice texture on the scabbard. You guys can see some ridges here. That helps secure these belt loops in place. Most scabbards do not come with something like this to just automatically hang your sword onto a belt. Typically, you have to get something additional, like an additional sword belt or a frog or something like that. And so the fact that this comes with something at all is nice, because if you don't like it, it's pretty easy to remove and upgrade it to something else. But if you don't have anything else, then this works. So it's a nice feature that they didn't have to add, and I like that they did. We have a small rain guard here. No complaints about how the scabbard looks. However, when I got this sword, I noticed on my particular one, it did not fit particularly well. And you guys can see that this is where the sword comfortably gets in. There's still a little bit of the blade showing, and I can force it all the way in. When I first got the sword, I forced it all the way into the scabbard, and I could not get the sword out. Now there's like a little bit of a pull and a tug, but it comes in and out. I'll talk about the result of the scabbard in a second when we talk about the blade portion and the cutting portion. But suffice it to say for right now that the scabbard was originally a very, very snug fit. It took a little bit of time to get it to a point where I could easily draw and sheathe the sword. Retention is just fine. See if you can hear any rattle. No rattle at all. So that's pretty nice. Moving on to the hilt components, we have a nice pear-shaped pommel that is not circular. So you can see that there is some dimension to it. If you look at it this way, as opposed to this way, you can see that there are some different dimensions. I had a few people ask if the handle was round or circular, because in some of the pictures, you get this profile and it might look circular, but when you look at it from this, you can see that it's a bit more oval. It's very comfortable. No issues indexing the edge at all. Just like in the movie adaptation, which we'll talk about, there is an additional ring here and a stopper here. Something that you don't find too often on historical European swords, but I think it looks nice. This transition here from the grip to the pommel, there's a little bit of an overlap there. So if you're sliding your hand up and down, it is noticeable, but not painful or sharp. I find that both these things put your hands pretty firmly into place. It doesn't really turn in your hand. So that is quite nice. Like I had mentioned earlier, the stitching is rather large, and so it is very noticeable. Sometimes the seam will be on the edge, but on this one, it's on the flat. Moving on to the guard, it looks great. Not overly wide, has some nice dimension to it. The gap between the blade and the cross guard is pretty thin. This is an interesting thing, because I could have sworn when I originally bought this sword, somewhere it had mentioned that it was threaded and not peened. I went and looked through a couple of reviews. One review did also mention that it was threaded, which if it is threaded, that is a little bit of a bummer for a couple of reasons. One of which is because typically, in my opinion, if you have a sword that is threaded, you want the pommel to be 100% symmetrical on every single side, because the pommel will not always line up perfectly on the threads. And so on this pommel, you can see that the dimensions here and the dimensions here are not the same. So if at any point this sword were to loosen up and I were to retighten it, the pommel might not sit exactly with where the blade is. This here is the cold steel French war sword, and this is a good sword to illustrate a couple of things. First off, hopefully you can see here in the stitching that the stitching is much smaller compared to this. Also, like I had mentioned before, the stitching is not on the flat, it is on the edge. And then finally, actually we can just keep, well, in case you want to see what this looks like. And then finally, this also happens to be a threaded pommel, which again, I'm not 100% sure if this is, and I'll get back to that in a second. But this is a threaded pommel. And so you can see that the pommel just spins off because it's threaded. But looking at the pommel, it is 100% symmetrical, regardless of what way you look at it. If the pommel loosens up slightly, or if you tighten it a little bit tighter, then it wouldn't change how the sword feels in your hand. When we compare that to this, you can see that the pommel is not symmetrical at every direction, that it is shaped and specifically meant to face a certain certain way. So if this pommel were threaded, then that would be incredibly detrimental to the way that it's shaped and featured. And if we tightened it slightly more, then it would not be in the same direction as the blade. And so that would probably mess with your edge alignment quite a lot. Again, I mentioned if it were because I'm not 100% sure, and I'm going to have to reach out to Ronin Katana and confirm. When I get a confirmation, I will do some sort of update.
Present Luke here, looking at past Luke as I'm editing this review. And yes, I did send an email to Ronin Katana, and I did hear back from them. They said that they are also unsure if I got a threaded or a peened version, because at the time they were doing threaded. Apparently they have transitioned or said that you can upgrade to a peened version. So if you are planning on getting this sword, definitely make sure to reach out beforehand and confirm that you are getting a peened version. Because they call it an upgrade, it sounds like it's not a standard version, so you may have to pay a little bit more, but trust me, it's worth it.
Now, what's interesting is I had talked about this sword a couple of times because I have been doing my cutting throughout the week and sharing the shorts of me cutting. And so someone else had mentioned that they bought this sword and it was peened. I went and looked on the website to confirm if it was threaded or peened. I could not find any information on the construction method. It looks like maybe there is a peen, and I'm not 100% sure. So I'm gonna show it here so you guys can see. It's either a peen that has been really well sanded down. Maybe it's a peen, I don't know. When we go into the portion of whether or not this blade is worth it, this construction method here will dictate for me a big portion of it. Now moving on to the blade itself. As you guys can see, it has a fuller that runs up most of the blade. The sword handles really nicely, easy enough to use in one hand or two. The blade did come sharp. However, I have not touched it up since I've gotten it about a year ago, and I can run a finger over without being cut at this point. The blade geometry and the way that it's shaped is incredible. So it'd be very easy to touch it up. And so I was like, what on earth? How did this happen? Because when I first got the sword, it was all very sharp. And I was like, what? I feel like I don't use it that much. How on earth did this happen? And then I realized the billion times I was doing this with the scabbard and the sword to make it fit, all of that probably dulled the blade out somewhat. And so all of the cuts that I did were with this blade where it's like in some parts, it is not that sharp at all. And like I said, I can rub a hand over it and not get cut. The blade geometry is still great. And so it can still cut through gallon jugs, no problem. But when it goes to harder targets, it just bashes them. And when it goes to water bottles, it does a lot of bashing and some of the cuts are not as clean. So I would definitely need to touch this up. Know that it did come sharp, but my scabbard just happened to be super tight, and I think that dulled it out over the course of a year. And I haven't sharpened it. How faithful a recreation is it? I happen to have the original United Cutlery replica of Aragorn's Ranger sword. And so I actually can just show you guys and do some comparisons here. Something that might not be 100% apparent when you're watching the movie is just how much fine decorations there are in this sword that you might not appreciate until you have it up close. Like for example, there are some inlay bits here, some wire bits here that just add a little bit of extra decoration to the sword, just make it look a little bit nicer, which you have the grooves for on here. So I could, if I wanted to, add something. Overall, as far as shape and size and length, it is pretty dang close. A very good recreation. This wall hanger version, when you feel it, if you just assume swords felt like this, you would be like, oh wow, swords are like heavy, clunky, not very maneuverable, which is kind of what I thought when I was 12. I was just like, oh man, swords are just heavy. Then when you pick up the functional recreation, which has like distal taper and proper weight and balance, it's just like, oh man, the difference is incredible. A couple smaller things here. On the original version, you can see that there's just this extra bit of metal, just extra weight here that they added, I guess for decorative purposes. That really doesn't need to be there. They fixed the crossguard, in my opinion, made it a little bit slimmer, and just got rid of this additional bulk, but still kept some of these things that are true to the original piece. They just made it a little bit more practical and a little bit more functional. One other thing here is the fuller goes almost all the way to the end of the blade. And then this one, the fuller terminates a little bit earlier, which gives a little bit more stiffness to the tip, which I'm totally fine with, because that makes it better in the thrust. And this sword is a monster at that. This seam here is basically invisible. Stitching is very tiny on that one compared to this. So the stitching is in a slightly different place. The color of the grip, slightly different. And it feels great, and it's fun to move, fun to use. Now, is it worth your money? And how much is it? This is under $400, so it's $395. And at that price point, I think this is currently the best replica on the market of the Aragorn Ranger sword. Now, I have heard through the grapevine that Swordier is working on a functional Ranger sword. I don't know when it's gonna be available for sale. I don't know what the final price is gonna be on that. But right now, for under $400, this is the best recreation Strider sword or Aragorn Ranger sword on the market. And if you want a Ranger sword, a little piece of Lord of the Rings that is functional and usable, then this is the best bang for the buck on the market right now. No contest, hands down. The only thing is, if this is threaded and not peened, then that would be a real bummer. It would still make this sword very good for the price. It would just mean that if for whatever reason, if this comes undone or unthreads or whatever, you probably won't be able to just thread it back on and be good to go. You'll probably have to make sure that it's aligned and use some sort of epoxy or Loctite or something like that to make sure that it stays in place. If it is peened, then great, incredible. Then it's totally fine, no issues. Hopefully that gives you guys some insight onto whether or not this sword is a good fit for you. This is my favorite fantasy sword recreation out there, and I absolutely love it. I am pumped that I bought it. There's one guy who said, yeah, I bought it and I went hiking. That sounds amazing. Yes, if next time I go hiking, I'm definitely bringing this sword. If you like Lord of the Rings and you like replica versions of Lord of the Rings swords and you want something that you can go out and swing and use and have a great time with, then yeah, this is a great piece. Thank you.